This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
We will try to fill any gaps with partners.
The World Health Organization responds to funding cut by the U.S. and vows to stay focused on fighting coronavirus. The African Union terms as regrettable Donald Trump's decision to cut funding to the World Health Organization. And a look at how some African nations are preparing for the worst in case coronavirus numbers keep rising. You're watching Africa Live. A warm welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe, and in studio with me with the day's business headlines is Rama.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up in business. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting that global economic output will shrink by 3% in 2020. An estimated global airline losses from the COVID-19 pandemic has risen to well over $300 billion. We'll have the details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. The number of coronavirus cases has reached a grim milestone. Over 2 million people worldwide have contracted COVID-19. More than 128,000 people have died. The United States reported 26,000 cases within the past 24 hours. Total infections there top 600,000, about a third of the global total. More than half of all cases are in Europe, with Spain and Italy the hardest hit. Iran has registered more than 76,000 infections. The Chinese mainland reported 46 new cases on Tuesday. 10 were local transmissions. The rest are people arriving from other countries. The head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says he regrets President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw funding for the organization. He's calling on the world to unite and fight the coronavirus pandemic. Trump has threatened to cut funding, claiming that the World Health Organization has contributed to severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the virus. The U.S. is the biggest donor to the Global Health Agency.
The United States of America has been a long-standing and generous friend to WHO, and we hope it will continue to be so. We regret the decision of the President of the United States to order a hold in funding to the World Health Organization. With support from the people and government of the United States, WHO works to improve the health of many of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. WHO is reviewing the impact of our work of any withdrawal of US funding, and will work with our partners to fill any financial gaps we face and to ensure our work continues uninterrupted. COVID-19 does not discriminate between rich nations and poor, large nations and small. It does not discriminate between nationalities, ethnicities, or ideologies. Neither do we. This is a time for all of us to be united in our common struggle against a common threat, a dangerous enemy. When we're divided, the virus exploits the cracks between us. We're committed to serving the world's people and to accountability for the resources with which we're entrusted.
Several leaders have also weighed in into the matter. The African Union Commission Chairman Musa Faki Mahamat has condemned the decision by U.S. President amid the coronavirus pandemic. In a post on Twitter, the African Union leader describes the move as deeply regrettable. Faki says the world currently depends on the health agency's leadership to help fight the COVID-19 pandemic. In Africa, over 16,000 cases of COVID-19 have been reported. The number of recoveries has risen to more than 3,000. Tanzania has announced 29 new cases on Wednesday, bringing its total to 88. South Africa and Egypt have the most of infections on the continent. Experts have warned that the numbers will keep rising. They called for more aid to be channeled to countries with weak health systems. A shipment of essential supplies from the United Nations is due to arrive in Africa. These supplies, which include masks and protective gear, will be distributed across the continent. Countries have imposed lockdowns to help curb the spread of the virus, but there is growing concern that such measures may be impacting Africa's already vulnerable food supply chains. Kenyan Foreign Affairs Principal Secretary Kamau Macharia has thanked the Chinese government for securing the well-being of Kenyans in China. He says that some measures taken in China to fight the coronavirus have been misinterpreted. The Foreign Ministry urges Kenyans to adhere to the rules and regulations of China.
As many of you are aware, we have close to 3,000 Kenyans in China, maybe even a little more. Some of them are not registered, so it's hard to be able to keep tabs of everybody. But we don't have in China a single case of a Kenyan who has succumbed to COVID-19. And this is a remarkable thing when you imagine that the crisis started in China. And if you recall, we have students who were stranded in Wuhan city, which was the epicenter of the crisis in China. And we remain very grateful that the Chinese government was able to secure the well-being of all those students. And as the lockdown is now being lifted, some of those students are now able to move around China once again. You have heard in the case of China about the situation in Guangzhou province. And this situation has been extremely worrisome to all of us. We have seen significant progress, and that is because there has been a serious attempt, both by the African Union, by our ambassador in China, including working with our colleagues, especially our colleagues from Eastern Africa, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China to try to make sure that this situation does not get out of control. What is important, however, is that we send a message to our friends and our relatives and our students in China that it is really important that they remain disciplined in the way in which they engage with the government of China, particularly when it comes to testing, particularly when it comes to protecting themselves, particularly when it comes to adhering to the rules and regulations of China. Because it is because those rules were implemented, it is because people took care and followed the instructions that were given by the Chinese government that we haven't lost one single Kenyan. This is a remarkable thing when you realize how many there are over there.
South Africa's Gauteng Health Department has set up a temporary structure at the Nasrec Expo Center to accommodate patients in case the coronavirus pandemic worsens. The Expo Center is to supplement designated health facilities. It's been identified as a potential quarantine site with a capacity of over 100,000 people. Yolisa Njamela has more.
South Africa's government is taking no chances. Should the numbers of people who have contracted the coronavirus continue to grow, this Nasrec Expo Center will be able to house large scores of ill patients. With the largest dedicated exhibition facilities in Africa, the Expo Center can offer over 42,000 square meters of covered space and an extra 80,000 square meters. Gauteng is currently the hardest hit province in the country.
So it's not a secret. It's something that all the countries have been doing. And we don't want to get to a point where our own demand, supersedes, the demand that is there. So we are confident that we'll put them in. As Gauteng, we are an epicenter. So being an epicenter means that we need to be prepared. I think we are taking the wrath of of the country, and we need to be prepared.
500 beds will initially be made available for patients who need to self-isolate or be quarantined.
We have huge capacity at the venue, as you all see. But at the moment, we're working with the health authorities to take it one step at a time, and we can build exponentially as the need requires. We pray that the need never requires for us to get to really, really high volumes. But I think we can, as a phase one, very easily have 500 beds available, and we can go from there based on demand if that demand arises.
Government chose to use existing resources instead of building a lot of temporary structures.
I think in terms of infrastructure readiness, what we've done an assessment looking at both mechanical and heating system for the facilities. When we were walking here, some of you members of the media, people were saying it's very cold. We've done an assessment, so when people move in, the facility will be ready. I think what Craig forgot to mention is that the facility has a capacity to accommodate plus or minus 2,250. So for the phase one, we'll start with about 500 beds, and we will ensure that those beds are suitable for occupation when that time comes.
Government representatives further explained that this period offers an opportunity to use hospitals and wards that were no longer working, as well as those that the province had been planning to get operational. The Gauteng Health Department says it will continue to look for other options, both in the public and private sector, to accommodate patients should the pandemic worsen. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A team of Tunisian scientists has been analyzing the virus that causes COVID-19. They say RNA test samples taken from Tunisia's patients have shown similarities to those in the United States.
Professor Ilham Boutiba leads a team of researchers who have been collecting and analyzing data on COVID-19 in Tunisia.
We've made the RNA test of 3 samples from 3 different Tunisian coronavirus patients. We've discovered that it's very similar to the one in the United States.
This is the first time since the outbreak began in Tunisia that the research unit opens the door of this high-security facility to show the sequencing machine and the whole genotyping process.
We command this machine from this computer. We select Start Running, that is, start genotyping the virus. The result appears as a peak on the screen. Each peak shows a special characteristic and genotype of the virus.
The Minister of Health has commended the research team. It is mainly composed of women scientists who have made a step forward in the fight against the coronavirus.
This fantastic team made an important scientific achievement. Identifying the RNA or essential nucleic acid of the virus will allow our teams to understand how the coronavirus is changing and adapting to our Tunisian environment.
The packaging of the infectious specimens within sealed and decontaminated containers is done by a special team. The transport and delivery operation to the reference laboratory at Charles Nicolle Hospital is made under tight security measures. The World Health Organization recommends that all diagnostic laboratory work and PCR analysis on clinical specimens taken from patients who are suspected or confirmed to be infected with the COVID-19 should be conducted according to specific practices. All measures have been respected by Tunisian research teams. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Elsewhere, Uganda says it has reached an understanding with China to provide assistance to Ugandan nationals who have been quarantined in hotels and cannot afford the cost. The Chinese government has also agreed to support Ugandans who have overstayed their visa duration by extending their permits and providing food and shelter. This aid will last until the current lockdown is lifted. Undocumented Ugandans who have been living in China illegally are also included in the new arrangements.
We have also agreed to continue engaging the Chinese government and asked them that because of the lockdown, and also because of lack of travel facilities now all over the world, Ugandans should be allowed to stay in China without being harassed and their expenses paid for. So Chinese government is considering all that, and we are pleased with the outcome of our engagement.
Well, China is stepping up its focus on people who are infected but not sick. 54 more tested positive without symptoms, bringing the total number of asymptomatic cases to more than 6,700.
We have expanded the screening scope to the close contacts of the asymptomatic infection, and also for key sites, key regions, and the key population groups. We have strengthened or intensified monitoring measures to maximize the identification of such cases. We have organized expert teams in 9 provinces and the municipalities. Simultaneously, we conducted the serological study, trying to better understand the epidemiological feature, the pathogenesis of the case, so as to minimize the risk of spread.
After a month of lockdown, Denmark has taken a significant step towards easing restrictions designed to stem the infection rate of the coronavirus. Some European countries are set to follow. CGTN's Guy Henderson reports from Berlin.
It is the first country in Europe to send its students back to school. Parents at this Danish primary in the city of Odense are on the whole supportive of that move.
When they first announced that they will introduce the school again, we were a bit anxious, but yeah, then again, it has to start somewhere, and it makes sense that it's with the younger kids who gets less sick.
There'll be strict distancing and hygiene measures. That is not enough for everyone.
Some parents are nervous and keep their kids at home, but I think out of 300, I have the discussion with maybe 5, and it's okay. Of course, you are nervous. As a parent, you are nervous.
After a month in lockdown, Denmark's infection rate is now falling. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen told the country on Tuesday restrictions could be eased faster than expected.
What we know and what we will continue to base our strategy on is that we shall prevent the virus from spreading too fast and to those who can't handle becoming ill, so that we continue to ask the Danes to keep their distance from each other, but in a gradually more open Denmark than we have seen in the last 4 weeks.
Neighbouring Norway will start reopening schools on Monday, as announced earlier this month. Hospitalisations there are down 30% from their peak. Both nations will have an eye across their borders to Sweden, though, where some experts now warn a more relaxed approach there is failing as the number of deaths soars. Norway already has border restrictions, while Denmark's crossing is shut. That could be a challenge right across Europe with its system of open borders. Austria, for example, moved fast to seal its crossings to Italy last month. As that country's curve also flattens, more businesses are beginning to reopen this week. The crossings remain shut. And then there's Germany, which also borders Italy.
This country was rated as the world's second safest place to be during this pandemic, behind only the Republic of Korea in one recent study. So the government here is also looking to see how it might ease its restrictions going forward, mainly to try and lessen the likely massive economic shock.
Even in those countries worst affected, like Italy and Spain, some shops are cautiously reopening. But their paths back from the peak will be longer and harder. For now, they can only watch as Denmark's young people head back to class. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Berlin.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Coming up. Dozens killed in community clashes in Nigeria's northeast. And UN's humanitarian agency says restriction of within and between countries making it hard to coordinate relief efforts.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
At least 25 people have been killed as a result of communal clashes in Nigeria's northeastern state of Taraba. Several houses and properties were also destroyed. His correspondent Phil Ihaza with more details from Abuja.
The Taraba State Police Public Relations Officer David Misal has confirmed the incident, saying it occurred in the Lao local government area of the state. He says about 100 houses were burnt down and many people injured. The violence was reportedly caused by disagreement over local fishing sites between two communities of the Shomo and Jol ethnic groups that depend on fishing as their major source of income. Police say there had been outbreaks of violence between the fishing clans before this latest incident, centered around disputed ownership claims over some of the fishing locations. The government had in the past banned fishing activities in the areas for a period of 10 years, but the communities resumed conflict as soon as the ban was lifted 2 decades ago. Nigeria has a history of dealing with insecurity challenges, including communal clashes, kidnapping and banditry. The State Commissioner of Police, Ahmed Azare, says patrol teams have been stationed on ground since Monday's incident. The injured are being treated in the hospital and that the situation has been brought under control. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Egypt's Interior Ministry has said security forces killed 7 terrorists in the capital, Cairo. The North African city was shocked by a massive shootout in a residential area which lasted 4 hours and continued beyond the curfew. The Easter holidays are usually a time for terrorist groups in Egypt to plan attacks. Here's Adel Mahri with more.
Residents of Al Amariya district near downtown Cairo have seen the biggest shootout in the Egyptian capital in years. For nearly 4 straight hours, security forces have engaged in a crossfire with 7 militants. From loudspeakers, security forces have instructed residents of the area to take shelter and stay away from windows and balconies. National Security Bureau says it has gathered information about a terrorist cell which has hideouts in areas south and east of Cairo. The Interior Ministry says the group was planning attacks during the Easter celebrations. As the clashes stretched into curfew hours, special forces were aided by counter-terrorism forces. The police say all militants have been killed. It also reported the death of a senior national security officer. Security forces have located another hideout for the same group. 10 machine guns and 4 shotguns, as well as large quantity of ammunition, were confiscated from the sites. The Interior Ministry is still searching for links with other terrorist groups who might be planning attacks during the same Easter period. The spring holiday is usually a target for several terrorist groups. Egypt still lives in a state of emergency because of 2 deadly attacks that took place in 2017 during the same time of the year. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The UN humanitarian agency OCHA says strict coronavirus measures are making it tough for seamless relief operations in Ethiopia. Aid agencies are now working with governments to establish mechanisms that will let them operate with more flexibility. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
At Ethiopian camps for internally displaced people, keeping a safe distance is a challenge. Many people sleep in groups or in crowded communal halls. Regional health authorities in those areas are concerned, but they say resources and capacity shortages make it difficult to keep people apart. The COVID-19 outbreak is also making it harder to get aid to those who need it. As many countries introduce lockdowns, humanitarian agencies say they need greater ease of movement.
We've stopped a lot of the community activities so that we don't have large groups. But at the same time, we have trucks with food, we have trucks with medical supplies, we have trucks with other materials that will be life-saving and life-sustaining over time. And so the idea is to allow our trucks to continue to move across borders, as it were, from one region to another.
The agencies are being forced to readjust operations.
Doing food distributions as quickly as possible, as safely as possible, having to do more distributions in more separated locations so as to maintain social distancing and all the other parameters that limit risk to the people we serve as well as to our staff.
On top of humanitarian difficulties, there is a new concern. The UN is worried about a rise in unexpected returnees to Ethiopia without prior health screenings. So far, over 5,000 have returned since the start of the outbreak, most of them from the Middle East. The International Organization for Migration says close to 2,900 returnees have arrived in Addis Ababa from Saudi Arabia since the enactment of a quarantine. They expect an average of 250 repatriations every day in the coming weeks from the Middle East country. The UN has called for a temporary suspension of flights to give Ethiopian authorities time to safely organize the returns. It hopes the ongoing negotiations between the two countries will help limit the spread of coronavirus. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In South Africa's Western Cape province, the leaders of the African National Congress have accused provincial and city authorities of rounding up Cape Town's homeless people in what they are calling an inhumane centralized camp. Renee Delcam has this story.
It's the third week of South Africa's national lockdown, and it's eerily quiet at the Strandfontein Pavilion on the outskirts of Cape Town. Just a few kilometers away is the local sports complex, which the city of Cape Town has turned into temporary emergency accommodation for around 2,000 of its homeless people. But the site has already caused plenty of controversy. City officials say it was set up quickly under the instruction of South Africa's COVID-19 national disaster regulations. But ANC officials want heads to roll, especially after an 18-year-old woman living in one of the tents was allegedly raped a few days ago.
We issued an alert that we will be coming here to do our oversight role as official opposition in the city of Cape Town. I mean, a person has been raped here. The city is quiet about it, okay? Nobody wants to take a responsibility.
But this delegation of senior ANC officials was denied access to inspect the living conditions at the facility.
When President Cyril Ramaphosa met with political leaders across the political spectrum at Parliament just over a month ago, they all agreed to work together in a united, non-partisan fight against COVID-19. But here in the Western Cape, the gloves now appear to be coming off between the Democratic Alliance, which runs this province, and the opposition African National Congress.
I see this as a kind of a mafia style. We are in a mafia city now, okay, where councillors cannot be allowed to do their work. So if they are saying then I'm disrupting, I'm doing whatever, they must do an honorable thing, come and arrest me.
The worst thing here is that we actually are undermining the national effort to contain the spread of the pandemic, because the conditions inside, I think, are rife for this pandemic to spread.
The ANC says it's imperative that the COVID-19 National Command Council, set up by President Cyril Ramaphosa, intervenes in this situation.
With all what I've heard, we are very clear as ANC, this thing must be shut down.
And they vowed to return here as a matter of urgency. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Schools across Nigeria are currently shut due to a coronavirus lockdown. An edtech firm is now offering relief to both students and parents through its currently free digital learning platform. CGTN's Deji Badmas reports.
Long before the outbreak of COVID-19, Thomas Ukejo and his partner had founded eSoft Content Limited, a tech firm that caters for education and builds content for students at different levels of education. eSoft has a learning content app called StudyMate, an interactive video textbook for computer and mobile devices which allows students to learn anywhere and anytime in the comfort of their homes.
Nobody predicted that COVID-19 is going to happen today. So we developed something that we thought at that time was right to do. You know, we don't have to have crisis to have a student learn anywhere at any time. But the good news is that we did that then, and now it's useful to students today.
With the ease of study mate, a teacher's voice comes up on the screen with instructions. Additional features on the app include a place for knowledge check after each lesson and a forum which allows students to ask questions and get a response from a teacher on standby. This content is available to students in junior secondary school in 4 core subjects: mathematics, English, basic science and ICT. Normally each unit sells for about $26, but eSoft is now giving this up for free so that every child gets an opportunity to continue learning and not get too disconnected from their education amid the ongoing lockdown.
Now there's no school. It's even dangerous right now to get an home teacher. How will home teacher even get to the child, you know, wherever he or she is? But with this, they can sit back and learn comfortably. We have an SD card that is readily available that we can distribute to the student wherever they might be, and they can have it deployed on their tablets or their phones without the need for internet connection, and they'll be able to stream all this video content offline.
Experience has been good so far. A lot of schools are keen into it and encouraging their students to use the StudyMate app. We're getting registrations every day on a daily basis, and students who have doubts about certain topics or questions can easily post it on a forum, and other people can collaborate and answer those questions.
Currently, over 1,500 students are signed up on the app, and Abigail is one of them. She sits with her dad at home while solving some math exercise on her tablet.
It's really helping me. Like before, sometimes I didn't really know some topics in mathematics, but now I'm learning it. In my classroom, I didn't really learn much about this, but now I learned so much.
eSoft intends to keep its platform free for as long as the COVID-19 lockdown lasts. But beyond that, Thomas Okejo and his partner believe digital textbook, with its ability to complement the work of a classroom teacher, is the future of learning. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Let's go to the Democratic Republic of Congo now, where children from families displaced by violence in Ituri province are leaving displacement camps and begging on the streets. The growing number of street children is becoming a big concern for some residents in Bunia. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
This is Bunia, the capital of Ituri province. This part of the Democratic Republic of Congo has seen conflict among armed groups over ethnicity, natural resources and political power. The violence has killed dozens of civilians and forced many on the streets, including children.
When they started killing people in my village, I ran with my mom to Oicha, a city in North Kivu province. We lived with my aunt until my mom died.
With nowhere to go, 10-year-old Augustine Muhego begs on the streets of Bunia.
I spend my time here on the streets with friends. When one of us gets something, he brings it and we all eat. And if I am the one who has gotten something, I bring it in and we all share. We have no other choice but to live this way.
The camps for the displaced are overcrowded, and food and other supplies are inadequate. More children are now showing up on the streets, a cause for concern among residents here.
This begging is painful for those of us who are parents. We do not want our children to be on the street, but since they do not have enough to eat and what the World Food Program gives them is not enough, this is why you notice that the children are no longer in their camps, they are in the city begging. This is a big concern for me. We do not want this phenomenon to persist. We want this new social system we are seeing in Bunia to stop.
60-year-old Celestine Pigo Panza lives in one of these camps. He has 2 wives and 9 children. 7 of them beg on the streets.
We don't have jobs to do. We spend our days doing nothing. We have nothing with which to feed our families, and that has sent our children to the streets. They have become street children because they do not have what to do, and we, their parents, do not have enough to take care of them.
The DRC's armed forces have failed to stop the violence in this eastern region. Rights groups warn that a crisis looms for the future of the children, as they are without supervision, no education, and are accustomed to daily violence and abuse. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Time for business news now with Rama.
Thank you very much, Peninah. Here's what's coming up in business. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting that global economic output will shrink by 3% this year. And estimated global airline losses from the COVID-19 pandemic is now over $300 billion.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sue Chonai. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start with a global picture in mind. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting that global economic output will shrink by 3% this year. Now, that will be the deepest contraction since the Great Depression back in the 1930s. This is the organization's first World Economic Outlook report since COVID-19 forced countries right around the world to freeze their economies. CGTN's Giles Gibson filed this report.
The IMF is calling global restrictions to contain COVID-19 the Great Lockdown.
Good morning, everyone.
And the organization's chief economist laid out how the lockdown is hammering economies all over the world.
The magnitude and speed of collapse in activity that has followed is unlike anything experienced in our lifetimes. This is a crisis like no other, which means there is substantial uncertainty about the impact it will have on people's lives and livelihoods.
The fund says the US economy will contract by almost 6% this year, and emerging markets and developing economies by a combined 1%. Italy, the hardest hit country in Europe from COVID-19, is expected to see its economy shrink by more than 9%. According to the fund, China's GDP will still grow in 2020, but only by a modest 1.2%. It's a stark reversal to what we heard in January, when the IMF predicted global GDP would expand by more than 3% this year. The US capital would normally be full of economists, journalists and finance ministers for the IMF World Bank spring meetings, but this year the events have gone virtual. The IMF also released its latest global financial stability report on Tuesday, saying early interventions by central banks have been working so far.
As a result of these actions, investor sentiment has stabilized in recent weeks. strains in some markets have abated somewhat, and risk asset prices have recovered a portion of their earlier declines. Sentiment continues to be fragile, however.
The IMF is projecting 5.8% global growth for next year, but only if the pandemic fades away in the second half of 2020. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
Still on the IMF, Sub-Saharan Africa's gross domestic product is also on track to shrink by 1.6%, the worst on record, mainly due to the combined effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and plummeting oil and commodity prices. The continent is expected, generally speaking, to reverse the contraction next year, and it could see growth of about 4%. But the impact of COVID-19 is going to be felt for years to come. The global lender is warning that firm forecasts are currently relatively hard to make. In the event of a more protracted disease outbreak and a deeper global recession, the report envisions that Africa's output could shrink by an extra 250 basis points this year. The report also outlined a 2.8% contraction this year in African oil exporters, that's namely Angola and Nigeria. Onto the World Health Organization, it says that countries that ease coronavirus restrictions should wait for at least 2 weeks to evaluate the impact of such changes before easing them again. In its latest strategy update, the UN agency says that the world stands at a critical juncture in this pandemic. Speed, scale and equity must be the guiding principles, the WHO says, when deciding what measures are necessary. Now, some of the countries that have been hardest hit by the virus are now considering lifting lockdowns and beginning a return to semi-normal life. But the WHO says every country needs to implement comprehensive public health measures to maintain a sustainable, steady state of low level or virtually no transmission if possible. It adds that countries should be prepared to react rapidly to control any spread. The WHO says any such steps need to be taken gradually with time to evaluate their impact before new steps are taken. Egypt has seen a significant growth in the manufacturing of items needed to help prevent or slow down the spread of COVID-19. Demand for face masks, for instance, has shot up significantly in the country. As CGTN's Adel El Marouki now reports, the prices of some brands have gone up exponentially.
In a country like Egypt, where citizens cannot afford to stay at home during the pandemic, people try to take as much care as possible. Millions take to the streets daily, and many of them resort to using face masks for protection. Overnight, the face mask has turned from an item that collects dusts on pharmacies' shelves to one of the most wanted ones in Egypt.
Our factory's main focus used to be surgical gowns and clothes. Face masks represented 2% to 5% of our production. It was merely an accessory, so we can have complete sets. We used to produce from 20,000 masks to 50,000. Today, we are at 150,000 masks a day.
Egypt was not prepared for that huge rise in demand for face masks. Some manufacturers have shifted their production lines to join that booming sector, putting pressure on raw materials and industrial machinery.
We ran out of stock for basic production material. At first we managed to import through flights, but now it's impossible with the flights lockdown. After we found a domestic producer that is covering our needs, we are now having issues with spare parts of the machines that are operating all day long.
Government and military industrial arms have joined the face mask production. The armed forces have been distributing at least one mask for every passenger taking the underground.
Public demand, however, remains much bigger, which of course affected the prices, which have seen phenomenal increase. Take this box, for example, of 50 masks. It used to cost 80 US cents before COVID-19. This week, pharmacies sell it at $32. That's 40 times more expensive.
Price of almost all other medical protective kits have soared as well. This is one of only 10 other registered factories in Egypt. Dozens more operate in the shadows. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Now, the estimated global airline losses from this pandemic have climbed to $312 billion. It's 25% more than previously forecast. This is a direct result of the severity of the economic downturn we're seeing around the world at the moment and a slower than expected reopening of international routes. Now, the latest forecast from the International Air Transport Association, IATA, is up from the $252 billion figure given on the 24th of March, and it represents a 55% drop in 2020 passenger revenue compared to last year. Now, Alexander Dejuniak, the airline body's Director General, says that airlines are quite literally fighting for their survival. Beyond the open-ended lockdowns and travel bans, there's deep uncertainty that still remains over the pace of an eventual recovery. Now, COVID-19 isn't discriminatory when it comes to draining the life out of businesses. Companies, large and small alike, are all trying to find a way forward through this crisis. Many thought business interruption insurance might see them through a crisis like a pandemic, but it turns out they were wrong. CGTN's Sean Caleb's reports from High Point in North Carolina.
Hi, thank you for choosing Barbecue Joe's.
Times are lean at Joe's Barbecue. Oh, the brisket is still tender and juicy.
Welcome, Barbecue Joe.
There just aren't as many people buying it these days.
Well, the frustration hit right when they told me that I was going to have to shut my dining room, and fear. But I had to take a deep breath and let that go.
Joe Housen has also had to let go 1/3 of his 100 employees at his 2 restaurants after sales plunged 40%. Now he depends solely on drive-through. Housen thought he was covered by business interruption insurance.
Yeah, you would think you know it's all good, but I don't know what happened on that. But it's no hope, with a business interruption. It's not there.
Here in High Point, North Carolina, Joe spent about 2 years working on a business plan before opening. He was banking on business interruption insurance to get him through tough times. Well, now his best hopes rest with the federal stimulus package. And if that doesn't come through, well, the future could be as empty as these streets.
Paula Wells has been Joe's attorney since he opened nearly 15 years ago. She helped Housen navigate his way through the federal package for the Payroll Protection Program, or PPP.
The Payroll Protection Plan is basically a loan that you may not have to pay back, depending on all kinds of stipulations.
There were also a host of last-minute changes to the measure that basically fueled a nightmare on Elm, Commerce, and every other street. Wells has been inundated and is swamped with business.
Okay, would you like Joe's sauce on it or on the side?
Her chief counsel to clients right now has been, do what you need to stay open.
I'm not hearing anger yet. I just think this came so fast and it's so different than anything before.
And I got to keep my confidence up because I've got my employees that are looking at me. And if they see me down and out and depressed, then they're going to get that way.
Thank you.
These days, cleaning supplies are in such demand, Housen keeps them in the restaurant rather than simply in a supply hut outside. Losing his catering and dine-in business has taken a mammoth bite out of profits. And if things weren't bleak enough, he knows the worst is yet to come. Sean Caleb's, CGTN, High Point, North Carolina.
And I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be looking at the government in South Africa. It has rejected a request for more funding from the state's carrier. It was looking for another $533 million. So what does this mean for SAA? Is this the death that we're looking at of one of Africa's large carriers? We'll be live in Johannesburg with some answers at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Peninah.
Thank you, Rama. And you're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. A Moroccan man goes round city streets feeding hungry cats as restaurants remain shut.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Let's head to Morocco, where a newspaper vendor has been providing food to stray cats amid a coronavirus lockdown. As soon as he's done with work, Abdelaziz El-Adressi goes to a market to buy chicken and meat leftovers to distribute around town. He began doing this after the government introduced the measures to curb the spread of coronavirus. The 39-year-old says with restaurants closed, the stray animals are left with no means of feeding themselves. He feeds around 50 stray cats a day.
We don't live alone on this planet. There are animals and other creatures living with us that we have to care for. I sell newspapers. Whatever I earn daily, I split it with the cats. If I go fishing, I bring them some fish too. They are our responsibility. If we don't take care of them, no one will. If there are just 10 or 20 people in each town to do this, then there won't be a problem.
Coming up in sports. Another high-profile Kenyan athlete